a Christian writer of secular fantasy fiction, there are few things that irritate me more than the typical Christian's response to the M word, magic. Being a generally considerate group of people, the Christian will start with my dream intro that I'm just so excited to answer, which is, "Hey, Christy, I hear you like to write. What project are you working on lately?" "Oh, well, it's a dystopian fantasy novel set 90 years into the future where the US government labels the biggest mystical religion as a terrorist group." And they're like, "Oh, really? Well, is the mystical religion Christianity?" And I'm like, no, it's actually a magical people group. You know, they believe in magic." And I lose them right there at the word magic. They're like, "Oh no, Christy supports witchcraft." And I'm like, actually, it's a metaphor. You know, like the magic is like a superpower almost. Like Superman. Jesus, close her mind from this satanic influence. Okay, look. Magic is almost always a metaphor in fantasy literature. Metaphor for politics. Metaphor for human longings and dreams. A metaphor for faith. A metaphor for miracles. Fantasy literature is basically realistic literature, but it throws in imaginary stuff to make its point. Fantasy is about what cannot be. You can't wave a magic wand and levitate your best friend by his ankles. You can't travel to a magical zoo to see the unicorns. It's all about transcending the possible and tapping into the realms of the impossible. The realms of the supernatural. You know, where our God lives. One of my university professors, I told her about my novel, and she reacted the way I showed you in the beginning of this video. She was like so scared of the topic of magic that I ended up changing my final project to something I felt was way less interesting but wouldn't get me a bad grade. She pointed out the fact that the word magic originated from the word witchcraft. But here's the key word. It originated in witchcraft. We're not living in medieval England anymore, where people believed that your local soothsayer can guarantee the success of your army, can curse your business partner, can call your loved ones up from the grave. Even if there are some wackos who believe that this stuff is still possible, that is not the mainstream belief in the wake of scientific absolutism, which is the myth that science explains everything and there is no supernatural. Now, fantasy fiction might portray these things that are impossible happening. We have to ask, what is the author's purpose in including this? Because, believe me, it's not because they believe that these things are true and happening. And is it to portray the mood of the community pre-scientific revolution? Is it to illustrate the longings of the human heart? Is it to champion a particular political belief over another? Is it a promise that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio? You have to read fantasy literature in order to find out and understand. Look, the modern problem with our youth is not, "Oh no, how can we keep our young people from having so much imagination that they're gonna go out and try to become witches and wizards?" No, that's not our problem. Our problem is the opposite of that. How can we teach our young people that science does not have all the answers? Fantasy fiction should be a Christian's natural ally in teaching their children about faith. A lot of fantasy promotes secular values, like this great novel that I love that also portrays sex outside of marriage as something just fine for a woman to do, that it's part of feminism. A lot of popular fantasy and science fiction portrays these kinds of values because the writers are not Christians. There is a dearth of Christian authors of fantastic fiction. Orson Scott Card wrote this lovely book, Ender's Game, which you may have heard of. He's actually a Mormon author, and he's highly criticized in the literary community for his beliefs. He's one of the only people of faith that I know that's writing this really madly popular speculative fiction. I think that if Christians understood the purpose of magic in fantasy, that it's a metaphor, not a handbook for witchcraft, there would be a lot more imagination in literature written by and for Christians.